The night Toby Mercer walked into the Iron Harbor MC clubhouse, he was carrying a dead man's lighter and a live boy's desperation, and neither the darkness outside nor the scarred men inside would ever be the same again. A 10-year-old child, alone, standing in the doorway of a place where grown men came to disappear from the world. The Zippo he set down on that bar was silver, worn at the edges, engraved with 3 letters that shouldn't have existed, because the man those letters belonged to had been dead for 15 years. Every conversation in that room stopped. Every glass held still. 30 veterans, drifters, and broken guardians stared at a child holding the ghost of their founder in his small, trembling hand. His mother was dying. Their home was gone in 3 days. And somehow, a dead man had pointed his son straight into the heart of the one brotherhood on earth that might still give a damn. This is their story. And I promise you, if you stay until the end, you will understand what loyalty actually costs, what family actually means, and why some men ride through darkness not because they love the night, but because someone has to. Hit that like button. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where in this world you're watching from tonight. And don't you dare look away, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about these men. The cold came off the valley floor the way it always did in late November. Not with warning, not with wind, just a slow, seeping presence that found every gap in every jacket and reminded you that warmth was something you had to earn. Bakersfield wore it differently than other California cities. Where Los Angeles draped its winters in performance and San Francisco wrapped itself in fog and irony, Bakersfield simply went gray. The oil fields on the south side went quiet. The truck stops on Highway 99 filled with men who had nowhere else to be. The neon above the auto shops and the bail bondsmen and the late-night diners flickered against a sky that offered nothing back. No stars, no moon, just a thick November ceiling pressing down on a city that had learned not to ask for better. Toby Mercer walked through it wearing a coat 2 sizes too large and shoes with a crack in the left sole that let the cold straight through to his sock. He was 10 years old, and he walked like someone twice that age, not with the defeated shuffle of a child who'd given up, but with the deliberate, conserving stride of someone who had learned that every unnecessary movement cost something he might need later. He kept his chin down. He kept his hands in his pockets. He kept his eyes on the sidewalk, except when he needed to check the street signs. And when he checked them, he did it quickly, efficiently, the way you learn to do things when you don't want anyone to notice you doing them. He had the address written on a piece of notebook paper folded into quarters and tucked inside his left shoe beneath the broken insole, because his coat didn't have working pockets on the inside and he didn't own a backpack anymore. The paper was soft from a week of carrying. He'd memorized the address 4 days ago, but he kept the paper anyway. Kept it the way you keep a thing when you're not sure what you'll have left if you let go of it. 18 blocks from the bus stop on Truxtun. He counted them. The Iron Harbor MC Clubhouse occupied the end of a short industrial block just east of the rail yard, a converted machine shop that had been there since the 1970s, the kind of building that looked like it had survived everything the century had thrown at it through sheer stubbornness rather than structural integrity. The exterior was corrugated metal on 2 sides, exposed brick on the 3rd, and on the 4th, the face of it, the side that faced the street, there was nothing decorative at all, just a steel door painted flat black, and above it, an old iron sign that had lost 2 of its letters and gained instead a kind of permanent authority from the loss. A camera above the door, a single bulb in a cage bracket throwing yellow light down across the threshold. 4 motorcycles parked in a diagonal row along the curb, their chrome catching what little neon existed on this block, and throwing it back fractured and cold. Toby stopped on the opposite sidewalk and looked at the building for a full minute. He was afraid. He knew he was afraid because his stomach had been doing the thing it did. The slow clenching and releasing, the hollow feeling that had nothing to do with hunger even though he was also hungry, since he'd gotten off the bus. But fear, he had decided somewhere around age 8, was information. It told you something real was happening. It didn't tell you to stop. He crossed the street. The steel door was heavy. He had to use both hands and lean into it with his shoulder, and even then it opened slowly, reluctantly, like it was making a judgment about him. The sound that came out from behind it was not loud. That was the first thing that surprised him. He had expected loud. He had expected the kind of noise he associated with the word biker from movies and from the things kids said at school. Crashing music, shouting, the general sonic landscape of men who had decided not to care about the world's opinion of them. Instead, what he got when the door swung open was something more like a low, dense hum. Conversation without urgency. The specific timbre of many men in an enclosed space who were not performing for anyone. Pool balls. A jukebox running something old and slide guitar slow in the back corner. The smell hit him simultaneously. Motor oil underneath everything, and leather, and cigarette smoke that had been exhaled into these walls for so many years, it had become structural, and something that might have been chilly from a kitchen somewhere behind the bar. And beneath all of it, very faintly, the smell of men who worked with their hands and didn't apologize for it. He stepped inside. He counted approximately 30 men before he stopped counting, because the math had stopped mattering. They were at the bar, at the pool table, at round tables pushed back against the walls, on stools and chairs, and in one case sitting on the edge of the bar itself, with boots hanging. They were various ages, but some clearly north of 60, some who might have been late 20s, and various sizes, though the word that came to Toby's mind looking around the room was not big or intimidating or any of the words he might have predicted. The word that came to him was weathered. These were men who had been exposed to something and had not been able to fully come back from it, and the exposure was written on them in ways that had nothing to do with the patches on their vests or the scars on their knuckles. It was in the way they held themselves when they were still. The specific quality of quiet that surrounded certain men at certain tables. The way some of them looked at him now, not with hostility, not yet, but with the immediate calibrated assessment of people who had learned that unexpected things walking through doors were not always what they appeared to be. The nearest man to the door was a heavy-set rider in his 50s with a gray beard trimmed to military precision and one eye that tracked slightly wrong. He looked at Toby without moving. Then he looked again, longer, and his hand moved almost imperceptibly to the bar beside him. The conversations around the room did not stop all at once. They stopped the way sound stops when something changes in the air. Gradually, from the outside in, each cluster of men registering the child in the doorway and going quiet in turn, until by the time Toby had taken 4 steps into the room, there was nothing left but the jukebox and the low, persistent complaint of the refrigeration unit behind the bar. 30 men looking at a 10-year-old boy. Toby did not let himself stop walking. He went to the bar. The man behind it was tall and lean in a way that suggested he had once been heavier, and the weight had come off hard rather than easy, leaving a kind of angular sharpness to his jaw and cheekbones. He had forearms like bridge cable and a horizontal scar across his left temple that disappeared into his hairline. He was somewhere in his late 40s or early 50s, and he wore the kind of stillness that Toby associated with men who had been in situations where stillness was the only thing that kept you alive. He watched Toby come to the bar. He did not say anything. Toby reached into his coat pocket, the one that worked, and he took out the lighter and he set it on the bar. He set it down gently because the surface was old wood and he didn't want to scratch it, and also because some part of him understood that this was a moment that required a kind of carefulness he couldn't have named but could feel in his hands. The lighter was silver. Or it had been silver once. It was silver underneath the years of handling, the places where the finish had worn to something almost white from 10,000 thumbings of the wheel and 10,000 flames. It was a Zippo, the old American kind, solid and rectangular, and on its face were 3 letters engraved in a script that had been done by hand, not stamped, EJK. The man behind the bar looked at it. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. He looked at it the way you look at something you had stopped allowing yourself to believe still existed in the world. And then he looked up at Toby, and for just a moment the careful blankness of his face fractured at the edges, something moving behind his eyes that had no name Toby could find. "Where," the man said very quietly, "did you get that?" It was not a question. The grammar of it was a question, but the tone was something else. The tone of a man who was trying very hard to stay inside a version of the present he could still navigate. "It was my dad's," Toby said. "He died in September." The room behind him, which had already been quiet, somehow went quieter still. a quality of attention that Toby could feel on the back of his neck like pressure, like everyone in the room had stopped breathing at exactly the same moment. The man behind the bar, whose name Toby would learn was Riker Kane, president of the Iron Harbor Motorcycle Club, and who was the last surviving son of Ezekiel James Kane, who had founded this club in 1987 and had been dead for 15 years, reached out and picked up the lighter with one hand. He held it in his palm. He did not open it. He just held it, and Toby watched something move across the man's face that was too complicated and too private to look at directly, so Toby looked at the bar instead and waited. "What's your name?" Riker Kane said. "Toby. Toby Mercer." Another pause. Longer. "How old are you, Toby Mercer?" 10. "Who brought you here?" "Nobody. I came on the bus." A beat. "I had the address." "How'd you get the address?" "It was in my dad's stuff." Toby looked up then because looking at the bar had started to feel like hiding, and he hadn't come here to hide. He had a notebook in the back of his closet in a box with other stuff. Your address was in it, and your name. He had it written down like he knew he might need it, or like he wanted someone to find it. He paused. "I think he wanted me to find it." Riker Kane set the lighter down on the bar between them and pressed 2 fingers flat against it, holding it against the wood. "Your father," he said, and his voice was controlled in the specific way of a man controlling it with great effort. "What was his name?" "James Mercer," Toby said, "but I found some other stuff too in the box. And I think maybe that wasn't his real name." The man with the gray beard near the door made a sound. Riker Kane did not look at him. He kept his eyes on Toby, and Toby kept his eyes on Riker, and neither of them moved, and the jukebox in the back corner finished its song, and for a moment the room had no sound in it at all, except the refrigeration unit and the wind pressing against the corrugated metal walls from outside, cold and insistent and patient. "My mom is sick," Toby said then, because he hadn't said the most important part yet, and the silence had started to feel like a closing door. The doctors say her lungs. She's on oxygen at home, and our house. We have 3 days. His jaw tightened and he looked at the lighter and then back at Riker's face. "I didn't know where else to go. I looked at everything in that box and your name was the only name I recognized. Everything else I couldn't figure out. But your name was on stuff. A lot of stuff. And he had a picture of you." Riker Kane went very still. "A picture of me? From a long time ago, both of you. You were younger, but I knew it was you because of..." Toby touched the side of his own temple, indicating the scar. The silence that followed lasted long enough that Toby's hands, which he had been holding carefully at his sides, began to tremble. Not from fear, from exhaustion. He had been holding himself together for a very long time, and the holding was getting harder. Then Riker Kane picked up the lighter and came around from behind the bar, and he crouched down to Toby's eye level, right there on the floor of the clubhouse with 30 men watching, and said very quietly, just for Toby, "Tell me your mother's address." His name had been James Mercer for 11 years. Before that, for 38 years, he had been Ezekiel James Kane, Zeke to the men who loved him, the old man to everyone else, founder of the Iron Harbor Motorcycle Club, architect of its codes and its loyalties, the man who had taken a collection of broken veterans and drifters and lost souls in a converted machine shop in Bakersfield and welded them into something that functioned as a family because no other word was accurate enough. He had been that man for 38 years, and then he had not been, and the not being had lasted for 11 more, and now he was neither. He was just a dead man whose lighter had found its way home in a child's coat pocket. Riker drove alone. He told the others to stay. He took the address Toby had given him, and he drove through the empty streets of the November Valley with the heater running and Toby in the passenger seat of the truck he kept for weather. And for a long time, neither of them said anything because there was too much to say and no clear order in which to say it. And sometimes the right response to an impossible situation is to drive toward it in silence and see what it looks like up close. Lena Mercer's house was a rental in a residential neighborhood on the east side of town, the kind of neighborhood that had been working class in 1985 and was something harder to name now. still maintained, still cared for in the individual small ways that people who take pride in what they can control will always maintain and care for things, but carrying the weight of a decade of economic attrition that showed in the concrete and the fencing and the sagging gutters and the way the porch light had been repaired with the wrong size bulb that threw the wrong color light. A paper notice from a mortgage servicing company was taped to the inside of the front window, visible from the street, and Riker saw it before he'd even turned off the engine. He sat in the truck for a moment. He knew Ezekiel Kane. He had grown up knowing Ezekiel Kane, had grown up in this very club, son of the founder, had watched his father build something real out of wreckage, and had promised himself and his father both that he would keep it real after the old man was gone. When Ezekiel died, when they were told Ezekiel had died, up near Fresno, single vehicle accident on a mountain road, no witnesses. Riker had been 29 years old and had taken the presidency of the Iron Harbor and had carried it for 15 years and had become, in the carrying, something his father would have recognized, a man shaped entirely by what he was responsible for, hollowed out in the places where personal life might have been, forged into function by the weight of it. He had grieved his father. He had grieved him the way you grieve the person around whom all your reference points were organized. And he had, eventually, with great difficulty and over a very long time, found a way to carry the grief at a distance where it didn't affect his ability to be what the club needed him to be. The child beside him had dissolved that distance in approximately 4 minutes. "Your dad," Riker said finally, while the engine ticked and cooled. "What do you remember about him?" Toby considered this with the seriousness of a child who had been asked real questions by adults and knew the difference between real and not. He was quiet. Not like sad quiet, more like he was always thinking. He worked at a machine shop. A pause. He smelled like motor oil. He made really good pancakes on Saturdays. When I had bad dreams, he'd sit on the floor next to my bed until I fell back asleep. He never said anything. He just sat there. Another pause, longer. He cried once. I saw him. He was in the garage and he didn't know I was there. He was looking at something, I don't know what, and he was crying without making any noise. That was the only time I ever saw him do that. Riker looked at the house. He ever talk about his past, he said, before Bakersfield? No, Mom used to ask sometimes. He'd say the past was the past, and it had nothing good in it worth bringing forward. Toby paused again. But he kept the lighter. He kept the notebook. He kept the picture of you. He looked at Riker in the dark cab of the truck. So I think maybe that wasn't exactly true. Riker got out of the truck. Lena Mercer was 41 years old and looked older in the way that illness that arrives early and stays makes people look older. Not in years exactly, but in the specific quality of her stillness, the economy of movement that you develop when movement costs you something. She was sitting upright in a hospital-grade adjustable bed that had been moved into the living room at some point for reasons of practicality. Stairs, probably, and the oxygen concentrator's reach. With a cannula under her nose and a thin blanket across her legs and a book open in her lap that she was not reading. She looked at Riker when he came in. She looked at him the way you look at something you have been expecting and dreading simultaneously, and she said, "He told me you might come someday. He said if something happened to him and I was in trouble, there was a man named Riker Kane who would help. That I should trust you." She paused. The concentrator breathed beside her, steady and mechanical. He also said he hoped it would never be necessary. "Mrs. Mercer," Riker said, and stopped, because the name alone had already told him something he hadn't been sure of until that moment. The way she'd said Riker Kane, with the specific weight of a name she had heard before. A name attached to a story she knew, but had been living alongside rather than inside. "He told you about me," Riker said. "Not much. Enough." She looked at her hands. "He told me he had family he couldn't go back to. That going back would put people in danger. He said the life he'd lived before was complicated in ways he couldn't explain, and that some of what he'd done he wasn't proud of, and some of it he was, and that the only thing he knew for certain was that he wanted the rest of his life to be different." She looked up. "He was different, I know that much. Whatever he was before, I knew the after. And the after was a good man." The concentrator breathed. "He was my father," Riker said. The words cost him something visible. His name was Ezekiel Kane. He founded the club I run. He died, we were told he died, 15 years ago. Lena Mercer closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet, but her expression was controlled. He said something happened, that people believed he was dead and that it needed to stay that way. He never told me the details. He said not knowing would keep us safer. She looked at the window and the darkness behind it. He must have been right about that part. We've been safe. Until now. What changed? Riker said. The foreclosure. When did that start? 4 months ago, right after James. Right after he died. She looked at her hands. The house was supposed to be paid off. He told me it was paid off. But then I got notices. The mortgage company I'd never heard of. They said there were payments missed going back 2 years, that the loan had been sold, restructured. The numbers don't make sense to me, and I can't. I'm not well enough to fight it, and I can't afford a lawyer, and Toby's school counselor told me about legal aid, but they have a wait list and we have 3 days. She said it flatly, without self-pity, which made it harder to hear than self-pity would have been. I don't know if any of this is connected to whatever James was running from. I don't know if someone is doing this to us deliberately. I just know that we're out of options, and that James told me if I was ever out of options, there was a man named Riker Kane. She looked at him directly then, without apology and without performance. Just a woman who was exhausted and sick and frightened and honest about all three. So here we are, she said. Riker looked around the room. He looked at the oxygen concentrator and the adjustable bed and the paper notice visible in the window and the small stack of overdue bills on the coffee table and the framed photograph on the wall that he could see from where he stood. Lena and James and Toby. Toby maybe 6 or 7, somewhere outdoors, all three of them looking at the camera with the specific happiness of people who have found something they were not certain they deserved to find. The man in the photograph had a different haircut and a beard he hadn't worn in his younger years and an extra decade of lines on his face, but the eyes were the same, the hands were the same, the way he held himself even in a photograph, the slight forward lean, the weight distributed like a man who expected to need to move quickly. All of it was the same, and Riker had to look away from it and look at the wall and breathe through his nose for a moment before he could speak again. "Okay," he said. "Here's what's going to happen." He made 3 calls from his truck in the driveway. The first was to the Iron Harbor's road captain, Decker Voss, who managed the club's practical operations. Logistics, security, the unglamorous machinery of keeping 30 men organized and functional. He told Decker to set up a watch rotation on the house starting at 6 the next morning. The second call was to a man named Holloway, who was an attorney in Fresno and who owed the Iron Harbor a favor of the kind that doesn't expire. He left a message that contained exactly 1 sentence. "Foreclosure case, Bakersfield, East Side, 3 days. Call me before 7 a.m. The third call he didn't make but sat with the phone in his hand for a long moment, looking at the contact name, and then put the phone away and went back inside because some conversations required more than 3 minutes in a dark driveway and more information than he currently had. The thing about Riker Kane was that he had spent 15 years running the Iron Harbor on a principle his father had established, and he had inherited and then modified. That the club existed to protect what needed protecting, that the loyalty the Brotherhood demanded of its members was only legitimate if the Brotherhood itself remained worthy of it, and that worthy meant something specific. It meant not asking your men to do things you wouldn't do yourself. It meant carrying the weight at the front rather than delegating it downward. It meant being the first one to the situation and the last one to leave. He had built the club on this. He had lost members over it, men who wanted something more comfortable, more profitable, more aligned with what outlaw motorcycle clubs looked like from the outside. He had kept the men who understood that the image was not the point. What he had not built into his principle, because he had not known he would need to, was any provision for what to do when the situation that needed protecting was your father's secret family and the grief you'd carried for 15 years turned out to be based on a lie. He went back inside and sat in the chair across from Lena Mercer's bed and told her what he knew and asked her what she knew, and they spent 2 hours assembling, from their separate angles, a picture of Ezekiel Kane that neither of them had been able to see whole before. It was not a comfortable picture. A man who had faked his death had done so for reasons. and reasons meant there was something, a debt, a threat, a consequence of choices made years ago that had required the faking. Riker knew parts of his father's history that Lena didn't, and Lena knew parts that Riker didn't, and in the middle, in the space between their separate knowings, there were things neither of them knew that began to feel as the night got later and the concentrator kept breathing, not like gaps in the story, but like the actual center of it. The place they were working around without yet being able to look at directly. He left at 2 a.m. He told Lena to lock the doors and call his number. He wrote it on the back of a bill envelope from the coffee table, if anything happened before morning. He told her not to talk to anyone about the notebook or what was in it. He told her the foreclosure would be handled, and he said it with the flat certainty of a man who had not permitted himself the luxury of saying things he didn't mean, so that she would understand he wasn't offering comfort, he was stating a fact. In the truck, driving back, he passed through the empty streets of the valley and watched the oil derricks strobing their warning lights against the low sky, and thought about his father and thought about a 10-year-old boy who walked 18 blocks in the cold to find the one door that might still be open, and the thinking required a kind of reorganization of everything he had believed for 15 years, and the reorganization was not comfortable, and he did not try to make it comfortable. He let it be what it was. He drove through it the way you drive through weather, not fighting it, just keeping the vehicle on the road and waiting for the other side. In the morning, he called the full club to the table. The meeting room at the Iron Harbor was separated from the main floor by a reinforced door that locked from the inside, and the table that gave the phrase its meaning was a single piece of old-growth oak that Ezekiel Kane had salvaged from a demolished courthouse in 1989 and had installed himself with 3 other men who were all dead now. The chairs around it were mismatched and had been replaced individually over the years as they wore out, so the table sat surrounded by a kind of democratic variety. A leather executive chair with one armrest missing, a school chair with a cracked back, folding chairs, a bar stool, a bench. Riker sat at the head. The others arranged themselves around him in whatever configuration their bodies required that morning. 22 men, that day. The rest were working or traveling. 22 men who carried between them a combined total of somewhere north of 400 years of various kinds of service and damage and repair. He told them everything. He was not a man who performed leadership, who staged it, who managed information to control effect. He told them what had happened, what he'd found, what he believed was happening, and what he thought it meant for the club. He set the lighter on the table while he talked, and the lighter sat there in the middle of the old courthouse oak, and the men looked at it, and some of them looked away and some didn't. When he was done talking, he said, "The vote is real. I'm not asking you to take this on because of my grief. I'm asking because a woman is sick and a kid walked 18 blocks to find us, and someone is doing something to their family that started before James Mercer died, and it's not stopping. Whatever my father was running from is still running, and it came back to where he came from." He paused. "If we vote yes, this is real protection, rotation, presence, the whole thing. This isn't symbolic." Decker Voss, the road captain, sat 3 seats down on Riker's left. He was a compact man in his mid-40s, dark-haired, going gray at the temples, with a specific face of someone who had learned to make themselves unmemorable, so not ugly, not distinctive, just consistently slightly below the threshold of the detail that sticks in a stranger's mind. He had been road captain for 7 years. He was good at the job. He ran logistics with the kind of precision that had earned him genuine respect in a room full of men who did not give respect easily. He watched Riker while Riker talked, and he voted yes with the others when the time came, and afterward he was the first one up, the first one to move toward the door, and Riker watched him go and felt something. Not a thought exactly, just a texture, a quality of almost recognition that he filed and did not examine yet because there was too much else requiring examination. The watch started that night. 2 men in a truck on the street in front of Lena's house, running shifts through the night in 4-hour rotations, silent and still and indistinguishable from the neighborhood to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. Riker drove by at midnight and at 3 and at 6 in the morning, not because he didn't trust his men, but because he needed the motion, needed the physical act of moving toward the thing that was in danger. He had always been like this. It was a flaw and a feature, simultaneously. On the 3rd morning, Holloway called. The foreclosure was more complicated than a simple missed payment situation. The mortgage had been purchased by a holding company and then restructured in a way that was, in Holloway's words, technically within the framework of what's permitted, but only if you define permitted very generously. He said he needed to see the original loan documents. He said there was a question about whether the restructuring had been properly disclosed to the borrower. He said, with the careful precision of a man who knew exactly what he was saying and why, that sometimes these things unraveled quickly once someone with the right expertise started pulling threads. Riker told him to pull threads. On the fourth morning, Toby came to the clubhouse after school. He came on the bus again, same route, but this time he knocked rather than walking in, and one of the prospects, a young man from Taft, who had been with the club for 8 months and who was trying very hard to seem unbothered by everything, let him in and brought him to the back room where Riker was working through paperwork with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Toby sat in the chair across from the desk and unzipped his backpack and took out a cardboard box, the kind that paper reams come in, with a lid. He set it on the desk. "This is the rest of it," he said, "from the closet. I didn't show you all of it before because I didn't know if I should, but my mom said if you're going to help us, you need to know everything there is to know because she's tired of secrets." He paused. She cried when she said that. She doesn't cry in front of me usually. Riker looked at the box. "Did you look through it?" he said. "Some. There's stuff I don't understand. There's a USB drive. And some papers that look legal, but I can't read them. And there's a key. For a lock somewhere. I don't know what lock." Riker opened the box. The contents had been accumulated over time, not organized for discovery, but stored the way a private man stores the things he can't make himself destroy. With just enough order to be retrievable, but not so much order as to suggest he had decided what to do with them. There were papers, yes, documents in legal format, densely typed, with the names of entities that appeared to be corporate structures of some kind. There was a USB drive, matte black, no label. There was a brass key without any identifier, the sort of key made for a padlock or a small safe rather than a door. There was a photograph Riker hadn't seen, not the family one on the wall, but an older image, slightly water damaged at one corner, showing 4 men standing in front of a building Riker recognized. The Iron Harbor, but 20-odd years ago, before the sign lost its letters, before the paint on the steel door went flat black. 3 of the 4 men he recognized, his father, a man named Cruz who had died in 2014, and a man named Adler who had left the club in 2009, under circumstances that had never been fully explained. The 4th man he did not recognize. He was younger than the other 3, late 20s perhaps, with a lean and watchful quality even in a photograph, the kind of stillness that read differently than the stillness of the other men around him. He turned the photograph over. On the back, in his father's handwriting, were 2 words and a date. "Keep this." And below it, the year, which was the same year the official account said Ezekiel Kane had died on a mountain road near Fresno. "Your dad gave you this box," Riker said. "He showed it to me once, when I was 8. He said, 'This box is important, Toby. If something ever happens to me, and I mean really happens, not just scared happens, you take this box and you find a way to the address in the notebook, or you give it to your mom and tell her to find a way.'" He said it like he'd practiced saying it. Toby looked at the box. "I practiced too after finding the address, getting to the clubhouse. I did it in my head a lot of times before I actually did it." Riker put the photograph face down on the desk and picked up the brass key and held it. It was heavier than it looked. "There's one more thing," Toby said. "I didn't put it in the box." He reached into his coat pocket, the one that worked, and took out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully and turned it so Riker could see. It was a handwritten note. The handwriting was shaky, done by someone whose hands were not steady. The handwriting of a dying man, or a very sick man, or a man who was writing something in a hurry and in the dark. It was addressed, "For Riker, if he ever finds this." It began, "Brother, I owe you more explanations than I can fit in a letter, but the letter is what I have. So here it is." Riker read it. He read it twice because the first time the words moved past him too fast, The way words move when the information in them is too large for the speed at which you can absorb it. The second time he read it slowly, word by word, and by the end of the second reading, there was a quality to the air in the room that Toby, young as he was, registered. A kind of pressure change, like the room was adjusting itself around something that had just become real. He folded the letter and set it on the desk, and sat for a moment with his hands flat on the desktop. "What does it say?" Toby said. Not demanded, asked quietly, the way you ask when you think you might not want the answer, but you've decided you're old enough to hear it anyway. "It says," Riker said, choosing each word with the care of someone navigating unfamiliar terrain, "that your grandfather, your father's father, hid something a long time ago. Something valuable, and something that some people want very badly. And that your father knew where it was, and that he kept the secret for 15 years because giving it up would have ended lives, including probably yours and your mother's." He paused. "And it says that the man who has been looking for it this whole time thinks your father is dead. He thinks the secret died with him." He looked at Toby. "He's going to find out that's not true." "Because of me," Toby said. "Because I came here. Because of you," Riker said. It was not an accusation, and he made sure it didn't sound like one. "And because of whoever has been watching your house for the past 4 days." Toby went very still. "There was someone watching the house before you sent your guys," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "For how long?" "We don't know. Long enough." Toby looked at the box on the desk, and then at the letter, folded, and then at the brass key still in Riker's hand, and he was quiet for a long time. The length of time that a child is quiet when they are doing something that looks like not thinking, but is in fact the deepest kind of thinking, the kind that takes everything you knew before a moment and reorganizes it around what you know now, the kind that you can see happening if you look at a child's face with enough attention. "Okay," Toby said, finally. "Then, what do we do?" Riker set the key down on the letter on the desk. Outside, on the street, a car that had been parked at the far end of the block for the past 2 hours and had not moved and had not turned its lights on even in the dark of the early evening, started its engine and pulled slowly away from the curb, unhurried, not running, just moving, the way something moves when it has seen what it came to see. Inside the club, Riker's phone buzzed on the desk. He looked at the screen. It was one of the men from the watch rotation on Lena's street, texting a single sentence that arrived like a cold hand on the back of the neck. "Someone tried the back door. We scared them off." But Riker, they knew where to look. The text message sat on Riker's phone screen for a long time before he put it face down on the desk. He didn't do it fast. He set it down with the deliberate care of a man who needed a moment to decide what version of himself was going to walk out of this room, because there were several versions available, and not all of them were useful right now. The version that wanted to hit something, that one was available. The version that wanted to get on his bike and drive until the valley gave out and the mountains started, that one was available too. What he needed was the version that had run the Iron Harbor for 15 years, the version that could look at a situation and identify the parts of it he could control and the parts he couldn't and allocate his energy accordingly. He picked up the phone and typed back, "Who saw them? Get me a description." Then he looked at Toby. The kid was watching him with the specific quality of attention that children develop when they grow up in households where adult emotions have consequences. Hyper-tuned, reading micro-expressions, calibrated to the difference between worried but manageable and worried and something needs to call change right now. Toby had been reading adults this way for long enough that he was good at it, and what he was reading off Riker, right now he was processing with a stillness that should not have been possible in a 10-year-old, but was. "Your guy's at the house," Toby said. "Yeah." "Someone tried the door." "Yeah." "My mom is alone in there, with just the oxygen machine." "No," Riker said. "She's not alone. There are 2 men outside and one of them went in when the door was tried. She's not alone." He held the boy's eyes. "I don't tell you things to make you feel better. When I tell you something, it's true. Understand?" Toby nodded. "Okay." Riker stood up. He picked up the brass key and put it in his front pocket. He picked up the folded letter and put it in the inside pocket of his cut, against his chest. He left the box on the desk. You're coming with me. We're going to your mother. They went through the main room of the clubhouse together, Riker moving in the particular way he moved when there was a purpose to it. Not rushed, not aggressive, just direct. The movement of a man for whom direction is the natural state, and the room read it the way the room always read him. Conversation shortened, eyes tracked. Without a word being spoken, 3 men were on their feet before Riker reached the door. He stopped. He looked at the 3 men. Briggs, who was built like a loading dock, and had 2 purple hearts and a tremor in his left hand from something that had happened overseas that he had never once discussed. Malone, who was 43 and had been with the Iron Harbor since he was 22, and who had a daughter in Sacramento he called every Sunday, and a sorrow about the calling that was visible in his face every Sunday evening, and a man everyone called Patch for reasons no one fully remembered, who had the particular skill of being invisible in any environment, the kind of man you could station in a room and have no one register he was there. Briggs, Malone, with me, Riker said. Patch, you stay. Keep an eye on the box in the back room. Don't let anyone in there. Patch nodded once and went. Outside, the cold was complete. November in the valley had settled in fully now. Not the theatrical cold of mountain winter, but the low, relentless cold of flatland in the dark, the kind that didn't make a sound, just crept. The Harleys at the curb had frosted slightly at their chrome. Riker's breath came out in a short cloud when he pushed through the door, and he walked to his truck with his hand on Toby's shoulder, not gripping, just present, just a hand between a 10-year-old's shoulder blades that said, "You are not moving through this alone." In the truck, Toby in the middle, Briggs riding passenger with his window cracked 2 inches despite the cold because Briggs always cracked his window, had since Iraq something about needing to hear the outside. Malone took his own truck and followed. Riker drove. "The man in the photograph," Riker said when they were moving. "The one I didn't recognize, the 4th man." "I don't know who that is," Toby said. "I know. I'm not asking. I'm thinking out loud." He turned onto the main road. "There were 4 of us in those years. Your grandfather, Cruz, Adler, and me. Those were the original 4 who built the club. If that photograph is from the year the date says it is, then the 4th man wasn't from our club." A beat. "Which means your grandfather had a relationship with someone outside the club that none of us knew about. And that relationship is old. Old enough to go back to the beginning of everything." The heater ran. The frost on the windshield defrosted from the edges inward. "My dad used to say," Toby said quietly, "that the most dangerous things in the world are the secrets people keep because they think keeping them is the same as protecting the people they love." He looked at his hands in his lap. I think he was talking about himself. Nobody in the truck said anything for a moment. "Smart man," Briggs said, from the passenger seat, without looking away from the cracked window. Lena's street was quiet, the way streets get quiet in working neighborhoods after 9 p.m. Not abandoned, just retired, the lights of houses going amber behind curtains, the specific domesticity of a neighborhood that has to be up early and knows it. The watch truck was at the curb, and as Riker pulled up behind it, the driver's door opened and a man named Cole stepped out. Cole was 31 and lean and had joined the Iron Harbor 2 years ago from a club up near Stockton that had dissolved under circumstances that were not good circumstances. And he had brought with him a quality of permanent readiness that Riker had recognized and valued, the quality of a man who had already been in the worst situation he could imagine and had come out the other side still functional. He came to Riker's window. "They came around 11:30, Cole said. His breath made small clouds in the cold. "East side of the house, back gate. Petrov was doing a circuit and saw them before they got to the door. 2 of them. Black car, no plates we could read. They taped them. Average build. They moved like they knew how to move." A pause. "Petrov said one of them had a radio earpiece." Riker processed this. "Professional," Briggs said. "Professional," Cole confirmed. "Not opportunists," Riker said. "Not someone acting on fresh information. Someone who has been set up to move when a trigger gets hit." He looked at the house. The porch light was on, and through the front window he could see the glow of the television, which meant Lena was awake. "What was the trigger?" Cole hesitated. "Just a fraction, just enough." "What?" Riker said. "Petrov thinks—" And I want to be clear, this is Petrov's read, not mine. Cole. He thinks the car was already on the block before we set up the watch. Like they had the address already. Before tonight. He looked at Riker without looking away. Before Toby came to the clubhouse. The cold air moved between them. Toby, in the truck, could not hear this conversation, but he watched Riker's face through the windshield, and what he saw there he catalogued and set aside for later, the way he had learned to do with things that were too big to look at directly right now. Inside the house, Lena was indeed awake, sitting up in the adjustable bed with the television running low. A nature documentary, something about migration patterns, the kind of show that exists in the background of insomnia without demanding engagement. She looked at Riker when he came in, and she looked at Toby, and some of the tension in her went out of her shoulders at seeing Toby, the specific release of a mother who has been holding her breath. And then the tension reconstituted itself because she could read Riker's face the same way Toby could, and what she read there had not improved since his last visit. "Tell me," she said. He did. He left out nothing. It occurred to him, sitting across from her in the chair he had begun to think of as his chair in this room, that his father had at some point made the decision to withhold information from the people he loved for the purpose of protecting them, and that this decision had created a situation in which those people were now in danger without the context to understand it, and that he was not going to make the same choice. Whatever his father had meant by it, the outcome was a woman lying in an adjustable bed in her living room who had spent 11 years living beside a secret and now had 4 days, 3 technically, because it was past midnight, before she lost her home and people with radio earpieces trying her back gate. Full information. That was what he could offer, that his father hadn't. Lena listened to everything without interrupting. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "The lockbox." "What lockbox?" Riker said. James had a lockbox. Metal, old-fashioned, fireproof kind. He kept it in the garage on the back shelf behind the camping gear. He told me never to open it. He said, She stopped, her breath catching, and she steadied herself and went on. He said it was for emergencies only and that I would know when an emergency was real. He said the key was somewhere I'd find it if I needed to. Riker reached into his pocket and took out the brass key and held it between them. Lena looked at it. "Oh," she said, very quietly. "Oh, James." She was crying before she finished the sentence, the contained crying of a woman who has been holding it for a long time and has run out of space to hold it. And Riker sat in the chair across from her and did not say anything because there was nothing useful to say, and he had long ago learned the difference between words that served the moment and words that served the person saying them. Toby went and sat on the edge of his mother's bed and took her hand without being asked and looked at the television, which was showing 1,000 birds rising from a salt flat in unison, moving as one body against a pale sky. The garage was cold in the specific way of an unheated space in winter, the cold that has been accumulating for hours, layered and dense and immediate the moment you open the door from the warm house into it. Riker went with a flashlight rather than the overhead light for reasons of instinct more than analysis. The camping gear was on the back shelf, a tent in its bag, 2 sleeping bags rolled and strapped, a camp stove still in its original box from whenever it had been bought. Behind all of it, shoved against the wall, a metal lockbox approximately the size of a shoebox, scratched and dented and old, the kind of box that had traveled. He brought it to the kitchen table. The brass key fit. The lock turned with the specific resistance of a mechanism that had not been opened in years. He had to apply real pressure, a second attempt, before it released. The lid came up. Inside, a USB drive, identical to the one already in the box on his desk at the clubhouse. A folded document that appeared to be a bank account statement. The numbers on it, even at a glance, were not small numbers, not small at all, the kind of numbers that require a second look to confirm the decimal is where you think it is. A second photograph, this one newer, clearer, color rather than the faded near monochrome of the older one. And a handwritten page, different handwriting than the letter Toby had given him earlier, rounder, more deliberate, the handwriting of a man who was not hurrying this time. The photograph stopped him, the same fourth man from the original photograph, older now by 20-odd years, but unmistakable in his quality of stillness, the lean and watchful set of him. He was standing outside what appeared to be an office building, photographed with a telephoto lens, unaware of being photographed, in mid-conversation with someone just off frame. On the back of the photograph, in Ezekiel's handwriting, a name, Marcus Breed, and below it, "He doesn't know I know. Don't let him find out." Riker stared at the name for a long time. Marcus Breed was not a stranger. Marcus Breed was the president of the Hollow Road MC, a club based out of the Central Valley with chapters threading south through Kern County and north toward Merced, a club that had existed in a specific and deliberate tension with the Iron Harbor for nearly a decade. Not open war. The Hollow Road wasn't built for open war. That wasn't their posture. They were a patient organization, the kind of club that moved around obstacles rather than through them, that accumulated influence through relationships and leverage and the slow application of pressure over time. Riker had dealt with Breed twice in formal settings and had come away from both encounters with the impression of a man who was always about 15% more relaxed than the situation warranted, which was either the mark of someone who was genuinely unafraid or the mark of someone whose real position was never visible in the room where you were looking. He had never been able to decide which. Now, holding a photograph his dead father had taken without the subject's knowledge, he was beginning to form a hypothesis. He sat at Lena's kitchen table with the lockbox open in front of him and his phone in his hand, and he thought about Decker Voss. He thought about the vote this morning, which had been unanimous, which meant nothing necessarily. A unanimous vote in a room full of men who loved the Iron Harbor could be genuine unanimity, the product of shared values and clear mission, which was usually what it was. But a unanimous vote could also be what you produce when the one man in the room whose vote would not be genuine needs the outcome to proceed in the direction it's proceeding, needs the club mobilized and moving so that he can tell someone something useful about where the club is mobilized and moving toward. He thought about Decker being the first one out of the meeting room. He thought about the text from Cole. He thinks the car was already on the block before we set up the watch. He thought about the specific operational precision of two men with a radio earpiece trying a specific door of a specific house within hours of the club voting to protect that house. He put his phone down on the table without making a call, and he looked at the bank statement, and then he looked at the document beneath it, the handwritten page, and he read it, and by the time he was done reading it, the kitchen was very quiet and very cold, and the only sound was the oxygen concentrator from the living room, and Toby's voice, very low, talking to his mother about something private, and outside the back window, somewhere in the darkness of the neighborhood, a dog barking once and then stopping. What the document said was this: that Ezekiel Kane had spent the better part of 2 decades holding a piece of evidence, financial records, transaction logs, documentation of a money laundering operation of significant scale, that connected a network of businesses and a network of people in a way that would have been devastating to several of them if made public or delivered to the appropriate authorities. That he had come into possession of this evidence not through investigation or intent, but through accident, through being in a position at a specific moment 15 years ago, where the information was available to him and he understood immediately what it meant and what it would cost him and what it would cost others if he acted on it or didn't act on it. That rather than act, rather than run, he had done the third thing that nobody ever chooses because it requires everything. He had held it. He had held it for 15 years, keeping the balance through his silence, keeping certain people at a sufficient distance through the implicit threat of what he held, living as James Mercer in Bakersfield with a woman he loved and a son he was teaching to be careful and patient and to never stop paying attention, holding the evidence in a lockbox in his garage and the weight of it in his chest every day for 11 years until his lungs failed him and he couldn't hold anything anymore. He had written, "The account exists, the money is real. I never touched it, I never wanted it, but it is the only thing keeping them from coming for the people I love. And now that I am dying, I need someone else to hold it, and I need that person to be someone Marcus Breed does not own." And below that, Riker. If it's Riker reading this, I'm sorry for what I had to do to you. I hope someday you understand what I was trying to save. Not the money, not even you. The kid. Always the kid. Riker folded the document. He put it in his inside pocket with the letter. He went back to the living room and looked at his father's wife and his father's son, and he stood in the doorway for a moment with the cold of the garage still on him, and then he said, "Pack whatever you need for a few days, both of you. We're moving." The argument happened in the driveway, short and ugly and necessary. Cole thought moving them was a mistake, thought it was exactly what someone in Breed's position would want, thought that moving them meant moving them through exposed space, through streets where a car without plates could follow, thought that the house was at least a known quantity with known defenses. Briggs thought Cole was right. Malone thought it didn't matter where they were as long as the right people knew where that was. And then he looked at Riker with the specific look of a man who has just heard his own words come out of his mouth and understood something from them that he hadn't understood before he said them. The right people. Someone told them about the house, Malone said. Someone in the club, Cole said, because Cole had been thinking it for an hour and saying it was worse than thinking it, but also cleaner. Riker didn't confirm or deny. He stood between the two trucks in the cold driveway with his hands in his jacket pockets, and he looked at the four men around him, Cole, Briggs, Malone, and Petrov, who had come around from the back of the house. And he looked at each of them in turn, not with suspicion, with assessment, which is different in that it doesn't start from a conclusion. Inside voice, he said. All of it. We talk about this inside. He looked at Cole. You're going to trust me on the move. I'm not driving them through open streets. I know where we're going, and I know why it's safer, and I'll explain it when we're there. Right now, I need you to trust me. Cole looked at him for a long moment. Yeah, he said. Okay. Good. Riker turned toward the house, then stopped, half-turned. And nobody calls the clubhouse tonight. Nobody texts anyone at the clubhouse until I say different. Everybody's phones stay off the club numbers. You talk to me directly, or you don't talk. Petrov, who was a quiet man under most circumstances, looked at Riker with the particular alertness of someone who has just understood the dimensions of a situation they thought they already understood. Riker, Petrov said. I know, Riker said. He went inside. The place he had in mind was a property the Iron Harbor owned through an entity at sufficient remove from the club's direct name. A former motel outside the city limits, on a rural road that paralleled the highway, that had been acquired 7 years ago in circumstances that were now not important and that had since been maintained as a kind of overflow space. Storage, a garage with real equipment, 4 rooms that could be made habitable on short notice. It was not beautiful. It was cinder block walls and institutional carpeting and a smell of old wood paneling that nothing would ever fully remove. But it had one road in, and the road was visible for a quarter mile from the main building, and the property was surrounded on 3 sides by agricultural land that was flat and open and offered no cover for anyone approaching on foot. He had used it twice before as a temporary safe house situation. Both times it had worked. He loaded Lena and Toby into his truck at 12:40 a.m., Lena in the passenger seat with her portable oxygen concentrator, a smaller unit, less powerful than the home one, sufficient for short term but not comfortable, and she didn't complain. And Toby in the back seat with the ream box and the lock box and a duffel bag of their things. Malone took his truck. Cole and Petrov and Briggs took the watch truck. They moved in a small, quiet convoy through the empty valley streets. No formation, casual spacing, and Riker watched his mirrors and watched the road and watched the mirrors again and said nothing for the first 10 minutes of driving. Then Toby said from the back seat, "The 4th man, in the photograph." "Yeah." "His name's on the back." "Yeah." "Marcus Breed." A pause. "I've heard that name before." Riker looked in the rear view. "Where?" "My dad. He said it once. He didn't know I was listening. He was on the phone and he said, if Breed ever figures it out, we're done. And then he saw me and he hung up and he never brought it up again. And I never asked." Another pause, smaller. "I should have asked." "You were 8, Lena said softly from the passenger seat. "I was old enough," Toby said. Not defensively, just as a statement of fact. The convoy moved through the dark, and the oil derricks on the south side blinked their red warnings against the low sky, and the valley was quiet and flat and cold all the way to the horizon in every direction. By 2 a.m., they were at the property. Riker got Lena settled in the largest room, moved the furniture, positioned the concentrator, found an extra blanket in the supply closet that smelled of cedar and age, made sure the room was warm before he let her lie down. Toby sat on the edge of the bed beside her until she was comfortable, And then he came out and found Riker in the main room that had been the old motel lobby, with its orange and brown carpet and its fluorescent lights that ran one shade too cool and its window that looked out across the dark approach road. "You're not sleeping," Toby said. "No." "Are you going to?" "Later." Toby sat down on the old lobby couch, pulling his feet up under him, and looked at Riker standing at the window with his back to the room, looking at the road. "My dad used to do that," Toby said. "Stand at the window at night, when he thought something was wrong. He'd just stand there and look outside, and I'd come downstairs and he'd say, 'Go back to bed, buddy.' But he wouldn't move from the window. He'd still be there in the morning sometimes." Riker looked at his reflection in the dark glass. "Did you ever ask him what he was watching for?" Riker said. "Once. When I was really little, like 6 maybe. He said, 'The things that are patient, Toby. The dangerous things don't always come fast. Sometimes they just wait.'" The boy paused. "I didn't understand it then. I think I understand it now." Riker turned from the window. He looked at the 10-year-old on the couch, this boy who carried his father's eyes and his father's quality of stillness and his father's particular refusal to be less than honest about what he understood, and he thought about Ezekiel Kane standing at a window somewhere, 15 years of standing at windows, and something shifted in his chest that he hadn't been ready for. Not grief exactly, because grief implies loss, and loss implies you had the thing to begin with, and what he felt right now was more complicated than that, more like the recognition of a parallel. 2 men standing at windows across 15 years of separation that wasn't chosen. He sat down in the chair across from the couch. "Get some sleep," he said. "I'm not tired." "I know. Get some sleep anyway." Toby looked at him for a moment with those eyes that saw too much, and then he lay down on the couch and pulled his coat over himself and looked at the ceiling. And within 20 minutes, his breathing had slowed and deepened, and Riker was alone in the lobby with the fluorescent lights and the window and the road. At 4 in the morning, Decker Voss called the clubhouse landline, which Patch picked up and asked where Riker was. Patch said he didn't know. Decker said to tell Riker to call him when he could, that there were things the road captain needed to coordinate. Patch said he'd pass it along. Patch hung up and looked at the phone for a moment, and then called Riker's cell on his own number, not the club line. "Decker called the clubhouse asking for you," Patch said when Riker picked up. "What time?" "Just now. 4:03. 4 in the morning, Riker said. It was not a question. "Yeah." A pause. He didn't sound worried. He sounded, I don't know, he sounded like a man calling to find out if something worked. Another pause. "Maybe I'm wrong." "Maybe," Riker said. "You want me to tell him anything?" "Tell him I'll call when I can." He thought for a moment. "And Patch, the USB drive in the box, the one in the back room, don't plug it into anything at the clubhouse." "Okay?" "Keep it separate from everything. Keep it on you." He thought again. "And I need you to find me a name, old contact, federal level, someone from the task force years ago, the one that worked with us on the trafficking situation in 2018, specifically the agent, the woman, the one who runs point. Martinez. I need a number for her, and I need it without using any of the club's normal contacts." He heard Patch breathing on the other end, processing. "Can you do that?" "Give me until morning," Patch said. "It is morning," Riker said. "Real morning," Patch said. 7, 8, I'll have it." He hung up. He went back to the window. The road was empty and dark, and the agricultural fields on either side were absolutely still, the kind of stillness that exists at this hour in flat country, where there is nothing to break the dark and nothing moving, and the silence is so complete it has a sound of its own, a low ambient pressure that you feel more than hear. He was still at the window when the headlights appeared. One vehicle, coming down the road from the direction of the highway, moving at normal speed, not fast enough to be alarmed about, but present where nothing had been present for 3 hours. And Riker watched it come without moving, without calling out, just tracking it with his eyes through the old motel window, while his right hand found the grip of the weapon at his hip, with the practiced automaticity of a man for whom the motion is not a decision. The vehicle slowed when it was 100 yards out. Then it stopped. It sat there for a long moment, engine running, headlights pointed at the property, and then its lights went off and the darkness was complete again, and the road was empty. 5 minutes passed. 10. Nothing moved. Then Riker's phone buzzed. Unknown number, local area code. He answered it. Riker Kane, said a voice he didn't recognize. Male, calm, with the specific flatness of a man who had worked very hard to remove all affect from his vocal presentation, who had learned that emotion in a voice is information, and information is a disadvantage. My name is Marcus Breed. I think you've recently found some things that belong to me. I want you to know, I am not your enemy. I was not your father's enemy. This situation is more complicated than it appears. I think we should talk before someone makes a mistake that can't be unmade. Outside the window, the darkness where the vehicle had been was absolute and gave nothing back. Riker looked at the phone. He looked at the road. He looked at Toby, asleep on the couch with his coat pulled up to his chin, his face slack and young and undefended. The way faces get in sleep, the way they get when the constant work of managing the world is temporarily suspended, when for a few hours you're just a kid again without the weight of it. He looked back at the window. You had men at the house tonight, Riker said. I needed to know if the contents of the box were still there, Breed said. That's all. I sent observers, not threats. If I had sent threats, you would know the difference. Try my back door again, Riker said, and you'll find out the difference is smaller than you think. A pause. The quality of the pause was not rattled. It was the pause of a man absorbing the statement and filing it accurately. I understand that you're protective, Breed said. I understand that a child is involved, and that changes the emotional calculus for a man like you. I'm asking you to be rational for 72 hours before that protection becomes something you can't walk back from. There is money in that account that belongs to a larger situation than your family or mine. I am prepared to make the Mercer family whole, the house, the medical costs, all of it. I want what your father held. That's the entire transaction. And Decker Voss, Riker said. Is Decker part of the transaction? This time the pause was different. Shorter, tighter, the pause of a man recalibrating. I think, Breed said after the pause, that you know more than I assumed. I know enough, Riker said. Don't call this number again. He hung up. He stood at the window with the phone in his hand and looked at the dark road and the dark fields and the dark sky above them that was beginning very faintly to go from black toward the deep blue that preceded dawn. And he thought about 72 hours and about Decker Voss, who had voted yes this morning and asked about Riker's location at 4 a.m., and he thought about a road captain who knew everything about the club's logistics, who knew the watch rotation schedule, who knew which properties the club maintained and where. And he thought about the fact that the one thing he had specifically said tonight was that nobody was to call the clubhouse. And somehow Marcus Breed had found this property anyway, was sitting at the end of this private road right now. And the only way that was possible was if someone had already told him or was telling him in real time where they were and what they were doing and where they were going next. He walked over to Toby on the couch, and he crouched down and he looked at the sleeping boy for a moment. Just a moment. Just the length of time it took to make the decision fully. And then he stood up and he walked back to the window, and he looked at the road, and he looked at the property around him, and he started counting what he had. 4 men he trusted. Cole, Briggs, Malone. Patch at the clubhouse. 20-plus men in the Iron Harbor whose loyalty he believed in, whose fundamental decency he had personally witnessed over years and years of the kind of pressure that shows you who a person actually is. One road captain whose 4 a.m. call and whose known connection to a man outside that window right now meant that the machinery the Iron Harbor ran on, the logistics, the rotation schedules, the property details, the operational information, had been feeding to Marcus Breed for some period of time that Riker could not yet determine. And somewhere in that machine, embedded in the information that had been moving in the wrong direction, was something else, something Riker could feel the shape of but not yet see clearly. The thing his father's letter and his father's document and his father's 20 years of careful silence had been organized around protecting. And whatever it was enough that a man patient enough to wait 15 years for a dead man's secret to resurface was currently sitting at the end of a dark road in a car with its lights off, close enough. He stood at the window for 3 more minutes after the call ended, not because he needed to think, but because moving felt like commitment, and he wasn't ready to commit to the next action until the shape of it was completely clear in his mind. Marcus Breed's car had not moved, no lights, just a presence at the end of the road, patient and still, the way a man who has waited 15 years for something knows how to be still. Riker put his phone in his jacket pocket. He looked at Toby on the couch. He looked at the door to the room where Lena's concentrator was breathing its mechanical rhythm. He turned from the window and went into the garage at the back of the property, where Briggs and Cole and Malone were drinking gas station coffee from a thermos and not talking, the way men who have been in long situations together stop needing to fill silence. He closed the garage door behind him. "Decker," he said. Nobody flinched. Nobody looked surprised, which told him they had been sitting in this garage for 2 hours thinking the same word and waiting for him to say it first. "How long have you suspected?" Cole said. "Tonight, the door attempt. The timing." He looked at Malone. "You said it yourself. The right people knowing where they are." Malone set down his coffee. "I didn't want to be right about that." "Nobody does," Riker said. "But here we are." Briggs had his arms crossed over his chest, the left hand with its tremor tucked under the right elbow, contained. "What do we do with him?" "We don't do anything with him yet. We can't move on Decker without knowing the full scope of it. How long, what he's given them, who else at the club might be inside this." He looked at each of them in turn. "We have 22 men who voted yes this morning. 22 men who know about Lena and Toby and the lockbox and this property. If Breed has one man feeding him, that's a hole. If he has two, we're a sieve." The fluorescent light in the garage ran with a faint flicker, the ballast going, throwing everything in a quality of intermittent shadow. "Patch," Cole said. "Patch I trust," Riker said. "He called me tonight on his own initiative. He could have told Decker where I was when Decker asked, and he didn't." A beat. "But I'm done assuming. We work from 4 until I tell you different." 4 men, Briggs said flatly. "Against Breed's operation and whoever else he's carrying." 4 men who know the truth, Riker said. "That's more than we had an hour ago." He left them in the garage and went back through the motel to the lobby, and he stood at the window again and watched the end of the road where Breed's car still sat, and he thought about what Breed had said. 72 hours, I am prepared to make the Mercer family whole. And he thought about what the document said, the account existing, the money real and untouched. And he thought about his father writing, "I never wanted it," and meaning it. And he thought about a man who had called Marcus Breed's name in the dark, and heard the silence at the other end shift and tighten. Breed hadn't known Riker knew about Decker. That was the only advantage he had, and it was temporary. He pulled out his phone and called Patch again. "The federal contact," he said. "Martinez, I need it faster than morning." "I'll wake some people up," Patch said. "Wake them up," Riker said, and hung up. At 5:15 a.m., Breed's car turned on its lights and left. The dawn came in slowly over the flat valley, gray first, and then a thin and unconvincing yellow, the kind of light that offers visibility without warmth. By 6, Riker had not slept. He had not intended to sleep. He had made a list in his head, not written, never written, the kind of list that a man in his position keeps in the specific memory he reserves for operational necessity, of everything Decker Voss had had access to in the past week, the watch schedule, the property address, the vote count and who voted, the contents of the meeting room conversation, the name Lena Mercer and the address on the east side, the box on the desk in the back room, the USB drive. That one landed differently. He sat with it for a moment. Patch had the drive now, per Riker's instruction. Keep it on you. But Decker had been in the clubhouse all of yesterday, had been present during the morning meeting, had seen the box come out of Riker's truck. Had Decker seen the drive? He called Patch a third time and asked. "He was in the back room," Patch said after a pause. "Before the meeting. He went in to get something from the equipment locker. The box was on the desk. I don't know if he opened it." Another pause. "I wasn't watching him specifically. I should have been watching him specifically." "You didn't know to watch him specifically," Riker said. "What's in the drive?" "Haven't plugged it in." "Don't. Not at the clubhouse. Bring it here when you come." He gave Patch the address. "And Patch, Don't tell anyone where you're going, not a name, not a direction. You get on your bike and you come here and that's it. Yeah, Patch said. Okay. Martinez first. Martinez first, Patch confirmed. Lena was awake by 6:30. Toby had not moved on the lobby couch. Riker brought her water and sat in the chair beside her adjustable bed, in the motel room with its water-stained ceiling and its orange curtains and its institutional quietness. And she looked at him with the kind of eyes that have been awake for a long time and said, "Tell me what happened overnight." He told her about the call. He watched her face while he talked. She received the information about Marcus Breed the way she received most hard information, without drama, without collapse, with the kind of contained processing that comes from having had to absorb difficult things in front of people she needed to remain functional for. But when he said Breed's name, she did something small and almost invisible. Her right hand moved to the blanket over her lap and took a small portion of it between her fingers and held it, not clutching, just holding, an anchor. "James mentioned that name once," she said. "Toby told me, on the drive here. I heard something else he didn't." She looked at the window. The curtains were closed and the morning light came through the orange fabric and turned everything in the room the color of a fire going down. "He was on the phone. This was maybe 3 years ago, maybe 4. He didn't know I was awake. He said Breed's name, and then he said, I remember this exactly because the way he said it made me lie still and not breathe. He said, if anything happens to me before this is settled, he will go for the boy. He will use the boy to get to the money, and then the boy becomes a liability." She turned from the window and looked at Riker. And then he said, "We are not going to let that happen." I didn't know who he was talking to. I don't know who was on the other end of that call. But the "we" was real. He was talking to someone who knew, someone he trusted. She held Riker's eyes. "Not you. He didn't know how to reach you. He'd been away from the club too long, and he was afraid contacting the club directly would expose us." A pause. So who was he talking to? Riker looked at the floor. The question was real, and he didn't have the answer. And the not having was a specific kind of discomfort. The discomfort of a puzzle with a missing piece that you can feel the shape of, that affects the shape of everything around it, but that you cannot see. An inside contact. Someone who knew about Breed and about Ezekiel and about the account. Someone outside the club who had been in communication with his father up until recently enough that 3 or 4 years ago they were still taking calls. He filed it. He put it in the operational list in his head, and he filed it, and he stood up and said, "I need to make some calls. You should eat something. I'll find out what's here." What was here, in the motel's small utility kitchen, was canned soup and instant coffee and a box of crackers that had not quite expired. He made the soup on the single-burner hot plate and brought it to Lena and went back to the lobby and found Therese awake on the couch, sitting up, holding his coat in his lap and watching Riker with those 2 old eyes. "I heard some of that," Toby said. "How much?" "Enough to know someone's going to try to use me." He said it without flinching, without the quaver that would have been entirely reasonable and understandable in a 10-year-old processing this information. But Toby Mercer had apparently decided sometime in the last 24 hours to stop allowing himself the luxury of responding to the situation as a child. "My dad knew it. He said it out loud on the phone. That means he was scared of it. My dad didn't say things out loud unless they were real." Riker sat down in the lobby chair. "It's real," he said, "and we're not going to let it happen." "My dad said that too," Toby said. "On the phone. That same sentence." He looked at Riker with the expression of someone pointing out an irony too sharp to ignore. "I hope you mean it different than he did." "I mean it different," Riker said, "because I'm still here." Toby absorbed this. Something in his jaw released, just fractionally, just enough. Patch arrived at 7:40 a.m. on a bike that had ice on the pipes from the cold ride and a face that had the closed-down look of a man who has been running hard since before dawn. He came through the door, handed Riker the USB drive without being asked, and then sat down at the lobby table and put both hands flat on the surface and looked at them. "Martinez," he said. "Number's in your phone now. I sent it from my cell while I was riding." He looked up. "She knows who we are. I didn't say your name, but I said Iron Harbor, and she went quiet in a specific way. She said she'd take a call before 9. Good, Riker said. What else? Patch looked at his hands again. The specific quality of his looking. The looking of a man deciding how to say a thing that he wishes he didn't have to say. Decker left the clubhouse at 6:15, Patch said. I was watching by then. He took his bike and he went south. I couldn't follow him without being made. A pause. But before he left, he went in the back room, alone. He was in there maybe 4 minutes. He looked up. The box on the desk. The papers inside. I don't know what he took, if he took anything. I don't know what he looked at. The garage door from the back of the property opened and Cole came in, followed by Briggs and Malone, drawn by the sound of Patch's bike arriving. They arranged themselves in the lobby in the loose way of men who are operating on no sleep and too much information, each of them carrying the particular weight of a situation that has become, overnight, significantly larger than it was the day before. Riker put the USB drive on the lobby table. We need to see what's on this, he said. Not here. Nothing here has a clean machine. Patch, where's the closest option? My nephew has a laptop in Delano, Patch said. Clean machine, nothing on the networks. Call him. Tell him not to connect it to anything. We come to him. He called Martinez at 8:50 from his truck in the property driveway, alone, windows up, heat running. She picked up on the second ring with the particular directness of a federal agent who has been doing this long enough to be done with preliminary softening. Mr. Kane, she said. You know who I am, Riker said. I know who the Iron Harbor is. I know your club was a cooperating party in 2018 on a trafficking interdiction. I know your road captain at the time. She paused, and in the pause, something moved that Riker didn't catch in time. Was also a cooperating party, which made the cooperation somewhat complicated in retrospect. The cold inside the truck was suddenly different. Say that again, Riker said. Your road captain in 2018, Martinez said. The cooperation arrangement involved him directly. He had a pre-existing relationship with the task force that predated the Iron Harbor's involvement. We used that relationship as a way in. A pause. You didn't know. My road captain in 2018, Riker said, with the exact controlled stillness of a man making sure he is understanding correctly before he responds, was Decker Voss. Yes, Martinez said. He had a relationship with the federal task force in 2018. He did. He came to us. He had information on trafficking networks operating through the Central Valley. His information was credible and actionable, and we ran with it. A pause that had its own weight. Mr. Kane, the cooperation arrangement ended in 2019. At that point, we had no further operational contact with Mr. Voss, but some of the intelligence he provided during the arrangement, intelligence we believed at the time was being provided in good faith, we have since come to question the sourcing of. Meaning, Riker said, meaning some of what Decker Voss gave us appeared to serve the interests of one organization over another in ways that may not have been coincidental. A pause. The organizations in question were the Iron Harbor MC and the Hollow Road MC. Riker looked at the dashboard. The heater ran. Outside the truck, the valley was gray and flat, and a light rain had begun. The thin, cold rain of a California valley winter that doesn't commit to anything, just seeps. Marcus Breed, Riker said. We've had Breed on our radar for several years, Martinez said. He's careful. He runs a significant money laundering operation through legitimate business fronts, and he has been careful enough, for long enough, that we've never had sufficient documented evidence to bring a case. A pause. We have been told, by a source we cannot currently name, that documentation exists. 15 years of transaction records. Complete chain. If that documentation is real, and we could obtain it through a legitimate chain of custody, it would be the most significant case this division has built in a decade. The rain increased slightly, running down the windshield in thin lines. My father, Riker said. We believe so, Martinez said. Your father was in a position to observe the early formation of Breed's operation. We believe he acquired documentation. We believe that documentation is why certain parties believed it was advantageous for Ezekiel Kane to be dead. A pause. Mr. Kane, your father was not just running from Breed. Breed had a partner in the early years, someone who helped him set up the financial architecture of the operation, Someone with inside knowledge of your club's structure and operations who could provide Breed with a layer of protection from interference. She paused again. That person has been identified. We have identified them within the last 18 months. Riker's hand tightened on the phone. Who? He said. I need to be careful about what I say on an unsecured line, Martinez said. I can tell you that it is someone you know. I can tell you that it is someone who has been in a position to monitor and influence your club's activities for a long time. Long enough that the documentation in your father's possession likely includes records of this person's involvement that would be, for them, catastrophic. The rain ran down the windshield. Somewhere outside the property, on the rural road that led to the highway, a vehicle went past with a speed that registered in Riker's peripheral awareness as slightly too fast for the road. He watched his mirror. The vehicle was gone. Decker Voss, he said. I cannot confirm a name on this line, Martinez said, but I can tell you that you should be very careful about who has access to that documentation. And I can tell you that we want to help you and that help has an official form that I am prepared to offer if you are prepared to receive it. A pause. What I need from you is the documentation. What you need from me is protection for the family. I think we can make that exchange work, but I need it fast, Mr. Kane, because whatever is in motion right now has been building for 15 years and it is not going to wait much longer. I'll call you back in 2 hours, Riker said. He hung up. He sat in the truck for exactly 60 seconds, not thinking, just letting the information settle into the structure of everything else he knew and finding its place there, which it did with the horrible clarity of a final piece that reveals the picture was never what you thought you were assembling. Decker Voss had not been turned by Marcus Breed recently. Decker Voss had been Breed's man for years, possibly from the beginning, possibly before Riker had even taken the presidency, possibly carrying the knowledge of who Ezekiel Kane really was and where he had gone for longer than Riker had been running the club. 7 years as road captain. 7 years of access, of logistics, of knowing everything about the Iron Harbor's operations and movements and contacts and properties. 7 years of feeding it, piece by piece, to a man who was patient enough to wait for the moment when the dead founder's secret finally resurfaced, and the 2018 task force cooperation, Decker going to federal agents with intelligence about trafficking, intelligence that was real enough to be credible and actionable, but sourced and shaped in a way that served Breed's organization over the Iron Harbor's interests. Using the federal relationship as another layer, another piece of protection, another wall between Marcus Breed and Consequence. Riker got out of the truck and walked back inside. He looked at the 4 men in the lobby, and he looked at Patch, and he said, "Where's Decker right now?" "Don't know," Patch said. "South, on his bike, last I saw." "Call him." Patch hesitated for just a fraction of a second, and then he picked up his phone and called. 4 rings. Voicemail. He looked at Riker and shook his head. "Call the clubhouse," Riker said. "Find out if anyone there has seen him." Patch called the clubhouse. A man named Jerry picked up. Jerry said Decker had come back at 7, gone into the meeting room alone, and then left again at 7:20. He'd taken the club's shared laptop with him. He'd said Riker had asked him to handle some administrative work remotely. Riker had asked him nothing. "The laptop," Riker said to the room. "The club laptop has the property management files, every address we own, maintain, or have used in the last 4 years." The lobby was very quiet. Malone looked at the window. The rain had intensified, running down the motel's old windows in sheets now, making the road outside waver and blur. "He knows we're here," Cole said. "He knows we're here," Riker confirmed. "He also knows we don't have the USB data yet because the drive was in the box when he checked it." He paused, "which means he'll move before we get to that data. He can't afford for us to see what's on it." Briggs unfolded his arms. The tremor in his left hand was running hotter than usual. "Then we need to move faster than he expects." The door to Lena's room opened. Toby stood in the doorway. He looked at the room and at the rain on the windows and at the faces of the 5 men, and he said, with the quiet directness that had become, in the past 24 hours, one of the most unsettling and admirable qualities Riker had ever encountered in anyone of any age. "Decker is the one." Nobody answered. "I heard you talking to Martinez," Toby said. "I wasn't trying to. The walls are thin." He looked at Riker. My dad's letter said someone inside the Brotherhood was carrying information to the outside for a long time. He didn't name him. He said he wasn't certain enough to name him. But he said the person would be someone who looked like exactly the right kind of loyal. Someone whose loyalty performed so consistently and so well that questioning it would feel like an accusation against the very idea of the club. He paused. And I think that's why my dad never came back. Not just Breed, not just the money. He found out there was someone inside the Iron Harbor who was Breed's, and he didn't know who, and coming back meant coming back into a place where he couldn't trust the floor under his feet. The rain hit the windows. Riker looked at the boy standing in the doorway in his too large coat, his father's eyes looking back at him, and he understood something then with a completeness that had not been available to him before this moment, that Ezekiel Kane had not abandoned his club or his son or his loyalty. He had spent 15 years holding a situation together with nothing but silence and distance, and the weight of a secret that, if released at the wrong moment to the wrong person, would have burned everything he loved to the ground. He had died holding it. He had sent his son to deliver it to the one person he believed was still clean, the one person whose name was in the notebook, in the box, in the back of the closet, for the specific emergency of a man running out of time. Riker's phone buzzed. Unknown number. Not Breed's number from earlier. A different, unknown, local, different area code prefix. He answered it. Breathing. Just breathing. For 2 seconds, and then a voice that was shaking. Not with fear, but with the specific tremor of a man who has made a decision that he knows he cannot reverse, and whose body is responding to the irreversibility of it before his mind has fully arrived there. Riker, said Decker Voss, I need you to listen to me. I don't have a lot of time. I called from a clean phone because mine is compromised. Breed's people have access to my regular number. They have for 2 years. I haven't been able to get free of it. I know what you think. A breath. I know what you think I am, and some of it is true. But not all of it. And the part that isn't true is the part you need right now. Riker said nothing. The laptop, Decker said. I took it because there's a folder on it, encrypted. You won't find it without knowing where to look. That has a dead drop address. A physical location. That's where your father's original documentation is. Not on the USB. The USB is a decoy. He burned that copy partial, altered, just enough to be convincing. The real records are at the dead drop. Your father told me about it. 3 years ago. He called me out of nowhere. I didn't know he was alive, and then I did. And he told me about the drop, and he told me what it contained, and he told me that if Breed ever came for the family, I was to get that information to someone clean and federal, and that under no circumstances was I to bring it back to the club because his voice broke just slightly, just at the edge. Because he knew someone in the club was Breed's man, and he didn't know who, and he was afraid it might be me, and he was right to be afraid, because for 2 years it was. I was. I gave Breed information to keep my daughter safe. He had something on her. A pause, the pause of a man swallowing something that has been lodged in his throat for a very long time. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I'm asking you to take the address and get to the drop before Breed does, because I called Breed an hour ago and told him it was at the dead drop and gave him a false address, and that bought us maybe 4 hours before he figures out the address is wrong and comes back to me for the real one. The rain was loud on the metal roof of the motel now. Your daughter, Riker said. He's had something on her for 2 years. I don't know exactly what. A charge, something she did when she was young and stupid, something he could use to destroy her life if I stopped cooperating. A breath. Your father understood that. He had a son he was protecting the same way. He didn't judge me for it. He just asked me to hold the address and wait for the right moment. And the moment is now, Riker said. The moment is now because Breed's people tried the house last night, and that means he's done being patient. He's moving. And when he figures out the false address I gave him, he's going to move directly and he's going to move hard. And I am done. I am done letting him use me to hurt people I have ridden with for 20 years. His voice had the sound of a man who has made the decision and passed through the fear of it into something colder and quieter on the other side. I'm done, Riker. Whatever comes after. I'm done. Riker pressed his palm flat against the truck door. Outside the motel, the rain came down in gray sheets across the empty approach road, and somewhere beyond the agricultural fields, invisible in the weather, the valley stretched flat and indifferent all the way to the mountains. And the mountains were hidden in cloud, and everything beyond this moment was hidden the same way, by weather, by distance, by the accumulated consequence of 15 years of secrets and loyalty and love and fear all arriving simultaneously at a single point on a... Riker copied the address Decker gave him onto the inside of his left forearm with a pen from the truck's glove box, pressing hard enough to hurt, because he needed it to stay, and he needed the pain to keep him sharp. He didn't repeat it back. He didn't ask Decker to confirm it. He said, "Stay on this phone. Don't go back to the clubhouse. Don't go to Breed. Stay where you are and stay on this phone." Then he walked back into the motel lobby, and he looked at the four men and he said, "We move in 3 minutes." Nobody asked questions. Cole was pulling on his jacket before Riker finished the sentence. Briggs picked up his helmet from the floor beside the couch. Malone was already moving toward the garage. Patch looked at Riker, and Riker looked at Patch, and something passed between them. The specific acknowledgement of two men who understand that the next few hours will cost something real and are prepared to pay it. "Lena and Toby stay here," Riker said. "Patch stays with them." "Riker," Patch started, "you're the only one I can put here and trust completely. That's not lesser. That's the most important position in this." He held Patch's eyes until Patch nodded. Then he turned to Toby, who was standing in the doorway again, shit. Always in the doorway, always watching, always present at the exact boundary between the adult world and the one he wasn't quite supposed to be in yet. "You stay with your mom," Riker said. "You don't open the door for anyone but Patch. Anyone." "I know," Toby said. "I know you know. I'm saying it anyway." Toby looked at him the way his father had looked out of that old photograph, with the weight of a person who understood the dimensions of what was happening and had accepted those dimensions without flinching. And then he said, "Come back." 2 words. Flat and direct, the way Toby said everything, without decoration. Riker said, "Yeah." He went out the door into the rain. The Dead Drop address was a self-storage facility on an industrial road 12 miles east, the kind of facility that exists at the edge of every mid-sized American city. Long, low rows of corrugated doors behind a chain-link fence, a keypad at the gate, no attendant on site after hours. The rain was heavier now, coming in at an angle off the valley floor, the kind of driven horizontal rain that finds every gap and doesn't apologize. Riker rode with it, hitting the side of his face and the exposed skin of his hands at the wrists, and he used the pain of it the way he used pain, as data, as presence, as the body's way of insisting it was still here and still functional. Cole and Briggs rode behind him. Malone had split off to cover the approach from the south, a precaution, because if Breed's false address bought 4 hours, they were inside that window, but not comfortably inside it. And comfort was not a resource any of them had available. The storage facility gate opened on a code Decker had given them. Ezekiel's code, unchanged for 15 years, the kind of detail that hit Riker in a specific place while he punched it in, 4 digits that his father had chosen, and a man had kept active for 15 years without being asked to, in silence, waiting for the moment it would be needed. Unit 47, 3rd row, left side. The door came up on a space that was not large, 10 by 10, the standard unit. And inside it, a fireproof cabinet, the serious kind, bolted to the concrete floor. On top of the cabinet, a second brass key on a hook screwed into the wall, tarnished from years of hanging. Riker opened the cabinet. Inside, a sealed, waterproof case, the military-grade kind. Hard plastic, pressure latches, a handle. He picked it up. It was heavy in the specific way of something that contains dense paper documentation and physical media. He latched the cabinet. He turned around. Cole was standing at the unit entrance, looking down the row. "Vehicle," Cole said. Low. Immediate. Riker heard it at the same time, headlights swinging through the rain at the far end of the facility, moving between the rows, more than one vehicle. The particular engine note of SUVs driven by men who are not browsing storage units at 7:30 in the morning. "They broke Decker's false address faster than 4 hours," Briggs said, behind Cole. "Or Decker gave them the real one," Cole said. "No," Riker said. He said it without deliberation, without needing to think about it. He didn't. He had Decker's voice still in his head. I am done. And he was a man who had spent 30 years reading whether people meant what they said, and Decker had meant that. They tracked the facility through the laptop, storage facility fees, account records. They were looking and they found it. He had the case in his left hand. He looked at the row. The exit was the way they'd come in, which was now blocked by the incoming vehicles. The fence at the back of the facility was chain link, 8 feet, with a 2-inch razor ribbon coil across the top. Back fence, he said. They moved. The case went over first. Riker threw it, heard it land heavy on the wet ground beyond the fence, hoped the military-grade case was everything its marketing claimed. Then Cole went over, fast, military efficient, taking the razor coil across his right palm on the way, landing and immediately turning to receive Briggs, who was already at the top. Riker went last. He hit the razor ribbon with both forearms crossed over his face, felt it open his jacket, and opened the skin underneath in 2 parallel lines that burned immediately and cold simultaneously, and then he was over and landing on wet gravel in the dark, behind the facility, with rain coming down on all of them, and Cole's right hand bleeding freely, and Riker's forearms running warm under his jacket sleeves. Briggs had the case. He ran. They hit Malone at the south approach on foot. Malone had heard the vehicles, had positioned himself, saw them come over the fence and brought his truck around without being asked. The passenger door already open before they reached it. Inside the truck. Moving. Riker's forearms were bleeding into his jacket lining. He pressed them against his thighs and looked at Cole, whose right hand was wrapped around his left fist, blood seeping between the fingers. How bad? Riker said. Not deep, Cole said. His jaw was tight. It's fine. Behind them, at the storage facility, men were getting out of SUVs in the rain. Breed's people, Briggs said. Breed himself, Riker said. He'd seen the lead vehicle clearly for a half-second in the headlights before the fence, a black Land Cruiser, and in the passenger window, barely visible, a profile he'd last seen in a photograph taken without the subject's knowledge, the lean, watching stillness of a man who had waited 15 years for this morning. He came himself. He knew what was here. Malone drove south, then east, then doubled back west on a rural road that ran between agricultural fields, the truck's headlights cutting through rain and nothing else for a mile in every direction. He drove without asking where because he understood that the destination was being calculated in real time, that Riker was working through the next move in the silence between breaths. The next move was Martinez. And the next move after that, the one that all the other moves had been building towards since a 10-year-old boy walked into a clubhouse with a dead man's lighter, was Baker Street. Because Breed had been at the storage facility, which meant Breed was in motion, which meant Breed was done with patience and done with proxies and done with the quiet machinery of leverage and waiting, which meant that wherever the Iron Harbor's people were, wherever Lena and Toby were, they were in a different category of danger than they had been 2 hours ago. Riker called Patch. 1 ring, 2, 3. Come on, Briggs said, quiet, from the back seat. 4 rings. Then Patch's voice, slightly breathless. Here. We're here. Someone drove the approach road twice, slow, didn't stop, but twice. Stay inside, Riker said. Nobody comes in. I don't care what they say, what they show you, what uniform they're wearing. Nobody. Copy, Patch said. We're 20 minutes out, Riker said. 20 minutes. He called Martinez while Malone drove. She answered immediately, as if she had been holding the phone. I have the documentation, Riker said. Physical case, 15 years of transaction records on Breed's operation. Complete chain, original documents. I need a chain of custody exchange, and I need protection for a woman and a child at a location I'll give you, and I need both of those things in the next 30 minutes. A pause. The pause of a federal agent processing a situation that has just escalated past the briefing parameters. Where are you? Martinez said. Moving. I'll give you a meet point. Bakersfield, East Side. I need your people there. Official capacity in 30 minutes. I can do 25, Martinez said. Then 25, Riker said. He gave her Baker Street. Not the motel, not the safe house, but Baker Street, the Iron Harbor's block. The one piece of ground in this city that was unambiguously his, that Breed knew and Breed's people knew, and everyone involved in this 15-year situation knew was the center of it. The place where this had to end, on ground that the Iron Harbor had held since 1987, because some things require the right location, and the right location was the one that meant something to every person standing on it. He hung up and called Patch again. "Move them," he said. "Now, bring them to Baker Street. My truck is in the lot. Keys under the driver's mat. You drive them. Straight there. Don't stop." He hung up and looked at the forearms of his jacket, the blood gone dark and dry at the edges now, still seeping at the center. Cole's hand, the case on Briggs's lap, heavy with 15 years of his father's careful, silent, costly protection. The rain on the windshield, relentless, the kind of rain that doesn't know when to stop. "Baker Street," Malone said. Not a question. "Baker Street," Riker confirmed. They turned north. Ahead, somewhere in the wet gray morning between the rain and the flat valley and the city's low-lit skyline, Baker Street was waiting. And so was Marcus Breed, who had been patient for 15 years and was patient no longer. And so were 20-plus Iron Harbor men who did not yet know what their road captain had done, did not yet know the full shape of what had been moving beneath the surface of their brotherhood. But who would be there when Riker arrived? Because that was what the Iron Harbor was. Men who showed up, who were there when the situation required presence, who had been built by a founder who believed that showing up was the whole point. Malone pushed the truck faster through the rain. Riker pressed his forearms against his thighs and breathed through his nose and watched the road and felt the specific cold clarity of a man who has passed through the fear of a situation and arrived at the other side of it, where there is no more fear because all the possible outcomes have been identified and accepted, and the only thing left is to drive toward the one. Baker Street was wet and gray and full of Iron Harbor men when Malone's truck turned onto it, and the sight of them, 23 riders in the rain, bikes lining both curbs, leather dark with water, standing without urgency, without performance, just present the way mountains are present, hit Riker somewhere below the sternum, in a place he hadn't expected to still be vulnerable. He hadn't called them. He hadn't needed to. Word had moved the way word moves in a brotherhood that has been built right. Not through channels, not through official communication, but through the specific frequency that men who have ridden together for years develop. The frequency that says something real is happening and the president needs bodies on the ground. They had come on their own, 23 men, wet, waiting, saying nothing, watching Malone's truck park in front of the clubhouse with the quality of attention that is the Iron Harbor's truest vocabulary. Marcus Breed's Land Cruiser was already on the block, parked at the far end, engine running, 2 vehicles behind it, 3 total, the math of a man who had decided to stop being subtle. The vehicles were running, and the men inside them were visible as shapes behind fogged glass, and none of them had moved yet, which meant Breed understood the arithmetic of the street the same way Riker did. 23 Iron Harbor men against however many Breed had brought. Breed was not stupid. Riker got out of the truck. His forearms were stiff under his jacket, the cuts from the razor ribbon having begun the specific process of sealing that involved burning and tightness, and the constant awareness of the injury without the freedom to address it. He walked to the center of Baker Street and he stood there in the rain, and he looked at the Land Cruiser and waited. The driver's door opened. Marcus Breed walked out into the rain without a jacket, in a dark shirt, and he walked toward Riker with the specific, unhurried quality of a man who believes the fundamental geometry of a situation is still in his favor, who has not yet recalculated. He stopped 10 feet away. He looked at Riker, and he looked at the men lining the street, and he looked back at Riker with an expression that was almost but not quite the expression of a man reconsidering. "The case," Breed said. "Federal agents are 4 minutes out," Riker said. "The case is already documented. Chain of custody is established. You're done." Something moved across Breed's face. Not fear. Not quite. More like the specific expression of a man who has played a long game and is watching the board shift into a configuration he cannot reverse. "You don't understand what's in that case," Breed said. "You don't understand what your father was part of in the beginning, before he decided to be something else." His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath the control now, something that had been patient for 15 years and was running out of the patience that had contained it. Your father was not clean when this started, Riker. He made choices. He was involved. The documentation cuts both ways. I read the document, Riker said. My father wrote it. He was honest about what he was at the beginning. He was also honest about what he chose to become. He held Breed's eyes. That's the difference between the two of you. He chose different. You never did. Breed looked at him for a long moment. Then the rear door of the Land Cruiser opened and Decker Voss got out. The sound that ran through the 23 men on the street was not audible exactly. It was more like a shift in pressure, a collective intake that didn't complete itself. The sound of a brotherhood processing a betrayal in real time, in the rain, on the street where they had all chosen to be. Decker walked toward Riker. He walked like a man carrying every step as a separate decision. His face was the face of someone who has burned the bridge behind them and is standing in the middle of it. He stopped beside Riker, not behind him. Beside. He looked at the men lining the street, and he did not look away from them. I fed him information, Decker said, loud enough to carry in the rain. 2 years, rotation schedules, properties, contacts. I did it because he had something on my daughter, and I couldn't find another way out. His voice held. Just barely, but it held. There is no version of that I can make right. I know that. I'm standing here anyway because standing here is the only thing left I can do that means anything. Nobody spoke. Cole, on the sidewalk to Riker's left, had his hands in his jacket pockets and his jaw set, and he was looking at Decker with an expression that contained approximately 15 different things simultaneously and resolved none of them. Briggs was looking at the Land Cruiser. Malone was looking at the ground. Martinez's vehicles came around the corner from the north end of Baker Street at that moment. 2 sedans and a van, unmarked, moving with the specific unhurried authority of federal agents who have arrived with documentation and mandate and do not need to perform urgency because the situation is already contained. They pulled up and agents got out, and Martinez herself, a compact woman in her 40s with short dark hair and the specific economy of movement of someone who had been in difficult rooms her whole career, came directly to Riker, looked at him once, looked at Breed, and said to the agents behind her, "Him first." Breed was arrested in the rain on Baker Street with 23 Iron Harbor men watching, and the watching had a quality to it that was not triumphant and not celebratory and not the feeling of men who have won something clean. It was the watching of men who have seen something real end, who understand that the ending required things they will be carrying for a long time, and who are doing the only thing available to them, which is to witness it without looking away. Breed said nothing when the cuffs went on. He looked at Riker once, just once at the end, and what was in his face in that moment was not rage, not defeat, but something that might have been, on a different man in a different life, the beginning of understanding. It didn't matter. The cuffs went on and he was walked to the federal van and the door closed, and the rain kept coming down on Baker Street, and that was the end of 15 years of patience. The conversation with Martinez lasted 40 minutes in the clubhouse, at the old courthouse oak table with coffee that one of the prospects had made strong enough to stand a spoon in and that everyone drank without comment. Martinez took the case. She documented the chain. She answered questions in the flat, precise way of a federal agent who has learned that honesty in the short term costs less than ambiguity in the long term. And what she confirmed, in her careful, official language, was this. Ezekiel Kane had acquired the original evidence accidentally, had refused to surrender it or use it for personal gain, and had maintained a silence that had, over 15 years, prevented the kind of escalation that would have destroyed multiple lives. His cooperation, post-mortem, would be noted. It would not restore anything, but it would be noted. Decker sat at the far end of the table and did not speak and was not spoken to, and when the federal agents indicated they needed a statement from him, he stood without being asked twice, and he went with them. And at the door he stopped, and he looked back at the room, and he opened his mouth, and then he closed it again because there was nothing available in language that was adequate to the moment. And he knew it, and so he just looked for 3 seconds, and then he went. The room held the silence he left behind it for a long moment. Then Briggs said, to no one in particular, his daughter didn't know. No, Riker said. Someone should tell her it wasn't that he tried at the end. Briggs looked at his tremoring left hand. Someone should tell her that. Yeah, Riker said. Someone will. Lena and Toby arrived at the clubhouse at 9:40 a.m. in Riker's truck, Patch driving. And when Patch pulled to the curb, the men who were still on Baker Street, most of them, because nobody had left, because leaving felt wrong until there was a reason to leave, looked at the truck and looked at each other and made the small adjustments that men make when they are trying to appear as though they are not doing what they are doing, which was waiting for a woman and a child who had never met most of them, but who were already, in the way that these things happen without ceremony, the reason everyone was still standing on a wet street at 10 in the morning. Toby got out first. He stood on the sidewalk in his too large coat, and he looked at the men and the bikes and the clubhouse and the wet street and the morning that was beginning, reluctantly, to open towards something that might eventually become light, and his face had the quality of a person who has arrived somewhere they were always moving toward without knowing it. Riker came out of the clubhouse door. They stood on the sidewalk and looked at each other, and then Toby did something he had not done in all the hours since he'd walked through the steel door with a dead man's lighter. He closed the distance between them, and he put his forehead against Riker's chest, not grabbing, not clinging, just resting there for a moment, the way you rest when you have been carrying something very heavy for a very long distance and have finally found a place to set it down. Riker put one hand on the back of the boy's head. Neither of them said anything. Lena came around the truck with her portable concentrator, and she stopped when she saw them. And she looked at her son, and the man who was her dead husband's living son, and the 30 years of grief and silence and distance that occupied the space between those two facts. And she pressed her lips together once and looked at the sky, and then she looked at Riker over Toby's head, and she said, "He would have wanted this." "I know," Riker said. "He was terrified you'd hate him." "I know that too," Riker said. "I don't." She nodded. Just once. The nod of a woman who has been waiting a long time to hear a true thing said out loud, and has finally heard it. The diner was called Polly's, and it had been on the south end of Baker Street since 1974, and it smelled of coffee and bacon grease, and the specific warmth of a place that has been feeding tired people through every hour of the day and night for 50 years, and has developed a kind of permanent institutional compassion as a result. They took a corner booth, Riker, Toby, Lena, Cole, Malone, Briggs, Patch, and they ordered coffee and eggs and toast, and they ate in the way that people eat when they have been through something real, and food is suddenly, specifically, gratefully physical. The coffee came in thick ceramic mugs. Toby wrapped both hands around his. He'd ordered hot chocolate, which the waitress had brought with the coffee and had set in front of him without comment, as if she had assessed him correctly on sight. He was looking at the table. Then he looked up at Riker. "The lighter," he said. "I left it on the bar. When I came in that first night." Riker reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, carefully, because the forearms were bandaged now. Malone had field-dressed them in the clubhouse with the kit from the back room, tight and functional, and he took out the silver Zippo and set it on the table between them. Toby looked at it. "It was his," Toby said. "Your dad's. Before it was my dad's." "Yeah. So it's yours." "It came back to me through you," Riker said. "That counts for something." He looked at the lighter on the formica between them. "Keep it. You earned the carry." Toby picked it up and held it in both palms the way Riker had held it that first night, feeling the weight of it, and then he closed his fingers around it and put it in his coat pocket, the one that worked, and looked out the diner window at Baker Street, where the rain had finally stopped and the morning was doing what valley mornings do after rain, turning the light gold and specific and clean in a way that only happens after weather, when the air has been washed down to its actual elements. Outside, along the curb, the Iron Harbor's bikes sat in a row. Chrome catching the new light, engines cold and quiet for now. Patient. Malone refilled his coffee from the carafe the waitress had left on the table. Briggs was eating with the focused attention of a man who had not had a real meal in 24 hours. Cole's bandaged hand rested on the table beside his plate. Patch was looking at the window with an expression of someone who has reached the end of a long road and is taking a moment to register that the ending is real. Lena's concentrator breathed beside the booth. She was eating slowly, carefully, the way she did everything now, and she looked at the men around the table. These scarred, weathered, rain-soaked, privately devastated men who had shown up on a street in the cold for a woman and a child they had never met. And she said, quietly, to no one in particular, James would have been embarrassed by all of this. He would have said you didn't have to. We know, Cole said, but you did it anyway. That's the thing about didn't have to, Malone said, wrapping both hands around his mug. Doesn't mean much once you've already decided. The diner ran its morning sounds around them. The short order bell, the coffee machine, boots on linoleum, a radio somewhere in the kitchen running a country station at low volume, a song about distance and coming home that nobody was listening to directly, but that sat in the room like weather of its own kind. Toby had his hand in his coat pocket, around the lighter. He was looking at Riker. What happens now? He said. Riker looked at the boy. He thought about a notebook in the back of a closet, an address written with the specific care of a man who believed in contingencies, who believed that the people he loved would find their way to the right door if he gave them the coordinates. He thought about 15 years of standing at windows. He thought about a letter pressed against his chest all night that had begun. Brother, I owe you more explanations than I can fit in a letter. He thought about what it meant to be the surviving son of a man who had loved too quietly and protected too silently and died with too much unspoken, and what it meant to sit across from that man's other son in a diner on Baker Street in the gold light after rain. The house stays, Riker said. Holloway's handling the foreclosure. It's done. Your mom gets the treatment she needs. We'll make sure of that. He paused. The account? Martinez's people will handle it. Most of it goes into evidence. What's left gets sorted legally, and whatever can be made clean gets used for what your grandfather intended it to be used for. He looked at Lena. Your life, not anyone else's. Lena looked at her hands. And us, Toby said. He wasn't asking about logistics. His eyes said exactly what he was asking. Riker held the boy's gaze for a moment, and in that moment, the diner and the men around the table and the city outside, and the 15 years of everything went quiet in the specific way that certain moments go quiet when they are real, when the thing being said matters enough to require the space around it. You've got a place, Riker said. Not a debt, not an obligation, a place. Whenever you need it, both of you. He looked at Lena. That's what family is. It doesn't clock in and clock out. Outside, one engine started, then another. Then the long, rolling accumulation of Iron Harbor Harleys waking up in the morning gold, the sound building from one voice to many, and then to the full collective voice of the Brotherhood. That sound that Bakersfield had heard for 35 years on this street, deep and American and unhurried, carrying distance in it, carrying the specific music of men who move through the world on their own terms and have earned the right to. Toby turned to the window and watched them. His hand was still in his pocket around the lighter. His father's. His grandfather's. His. The road stretched south from Baker Street through the flat valley, and the morning light lay across it clean and long, and the bikes moved into it one by one, and Riker finished his coffee and set the mug down on the table and looked at the boy watching the window and did not say anything because there was nothing left to say that the morning hadn't already said better. In the language of engines and light and the specific gold of a California valley after rain, which is the closest this flat and difficult and occasionally magnificent country ever gets to forgiveness.